The sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and bleached linoleum is a smell that Izuku Midoriya would never, for as long as he lived, be able to dissociate from the sound of a heart breaking. He was 4 years old, sitting on an examination table that was far too large for him. The paper crinkled beneath his thighs as he swung his short legs back and forth, entirely oblivious to the monumental shift that was about to occur in his life. In his small, chubby hand, he gripped a limited edition Silver Age All Might action figure. He squeezed the plastic hero like a lifeline, his wide, emerald green eyes fixed eagerly on the doctor sitting across from him. Dr. Tsubasa was a rotund man with a thick, bushy mustache and strange goggles resting upon his bald head. He held an X-ray film up to the harsh fluorescent light of the clinic. The silence in the room stretched out, thin and fragile, like a rubber band pulled to its absolute limit. Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother, sat in the chair beside the examination table. Her hands were wrung tightly together in her lap, her knuckles white. "Doctor?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Is there something wrong?" Most of the other children in Izuku's kindergarten class have already manifested their quirks. He's the only one who hasn't. We thought. Well, my husband breathes fire, and I can pull small objects. Dr. Tsubasa sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. He lowered the X-ray and looked directly at Izuku. It wasn't a look of pity. It was a look of cold, clinical finality. "You should probably give it up, kid," the doctor said, his voice entirely devoid of bedside manner. The words didn't compute immediately. Izuku just blinked, the smile frozen on his face, though it began to tremble at the edges. "Give it up? I'm sorry, but it's the truth," Dr. Tsubasa continued, turning his chair to face Inko. "You see this X-ray of your son's foot? In the early days of quirk research, scientists discovered a link between the presence of a quirk and the evolution of the human body. People with quirks have a streamlined physiology. They lack the extra joint in the pinky toe. It's an evolutionary step forward." He tapped the film with a pen. "Izuku here has 2 joints. It's an archaic trait. I don't care how much he dreams. Biologically speaking, he is completely normal. He is quirkless. He will never have a power." The All Might action figure slipped from Izuku's slackened grip. It hit the linoleum floor with a hollow clack, sliding a few inches before coming to a stop face down. Izuku couldn't hear his mother's frantic, tearful questions. He couldn't hear the doctor's indifferent explanations. It was as if he had been submerged underwater. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears, drowning out the world. Quirkless. The word echoed in the cavern of his mind. In a society where 80% of the population possessed a superhuman ability, being quirkless wasn't just a medical diagnosis. It was a social death sentence. It meant he was fragile. It meant he was obsolete. Above all else, it meant he could never, ever be a hero like All Might. The devastation was too immense for a 4-year-old brain to process. The sheer emotional weight of a shattered dream pressed down on his tiny chest, crushing his lungs. He couldn't breathe. The edges of his vision began to blur, darkening to a fuzzy black. "Izuku?" Inko's voice pierced the ringing, panicked and shrill. "Izuku, baby, are you okay?" He wasn't. The room spun wildly. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his body went entirely limp. The last thing he felt was his mother's desperate hands catching him before he hit the floor, and then, he plunged into darkness. Drip, drip, drip. Izuku opened his eyes. He wasn't in the doctor's office anymore. He was standing on a mirror-like surface of perfectly still, dark water. The sky above him was an endless expanse of twilight, painted in deep purples and bruised blues. There was no horizon, just an infinite expanse of quiet solitude. "Where am I?" the boy wondered, looking down at his small hands. He wasn't afraid, strangely enough. The crushing despair from the doctor's office had vanished, replaced by a profound, echoing emptiness. Suddenly, the water rippled. A few feet away from him, the dark water began to bubble. Izuku took a cautious step back as something breached the surface. First, it was a mane of wildly spiky, voluminous white hair. Then came a broad, muscular back clad in a mesh shirt, followed by a red haori coat. A man rose from the watery depths, gasping for air, though no water clung to him. He was massive, built like a mountain, with a strange, horned forehead protector resting on his brow, adorned with a single kanji character, oil. Red lines ran down his face from his eyes, making him look fierce and wild. His left arm ended abruptly in a stump wrapped in bandages, and his chest bore a series of terrifying, fatal-looking puncture wounds. The man fell to his knees on the surface of the water, coughing heavily before slowly pushing himself upright. He looked around the endless twilight, a wry, exhausted smile spreading across his face. So, the man muttered, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. This isn't the Pure Land. Not quite hell, either, I suppose? Guess a pervy old fool like me doesn't get a straight ticket to paradise, eh? Izuku stood frozen, his emerald eyes wide. Excuse me? The giant of a man snapped his head around. His sharp, dark eyes locked onto the 4-year-old boy. For a moment, surprise flashed across his hardened features, quickly replaced by a soft, melancholic curiosity. Well, now, the man rumbled, slowly getting to his feet and towering over Izuku. You're a long way from home, kid. What's a tadpole like you doing in the space between life and death? I don't know, Izuku whispered, tears suddenly welling in his eyes as the memory of the doctor's office returned. I passed out. The doctor said, I'm quirkless. He said I can't be a hero. My dream is dead. The man frowned, crossing his remaining arm over his broad chest. Quirkless? Hero? Can't say I know exactly what those words mean where you're from, kid. But I know a thing or two about dead dreams. The man crouched down, ignoring the phantom pain of his wounds, bringing himself closer to Izuku's eye level. He reached out with his large, calloused hand and gently rested it on Izuku's mess of green hair. The touch was incredibly warm. The name is Jiraiya, the man said, a proud, boisterous grin breaking through his exhaustion. The Toad Sage of Mount Myaboku. A legendary Sannin of the Hidden Leaf Village, and perhaps more importantly, a man who failed at almost everything he ever set out to do. Izuku blinked away his tears, thoroughly confused. You failed? But you look so strong. Jiraiya chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. Strength doesn't mean you win, kid. I couldn't save my master. I couldn't save my student. I couldn't bring my best friend back from the dark. And in the end, I died trying to fix a mess I helped create. He looked out at the endless twilight, his eyes softening. But I passed my will on. To a knucklehead ninja who never knew when to quit. I died believing that he would bring peace to our world. Jiraiya turned his gaze back to Izuku, staring deeply into the boy's emerald eyes. The sage's eyes widened slightly, a profound realization washing over him. The connection between them in this space wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a random spirit. I see, Jiraiya murmured, the pieces falling into place. The cycle continues. You aren't just a kid who wandered into my afterlife. You're my next life, aren't you? I'm your next life? Reincarnation, kid. A soul reborn, Jiraiya said, a mixture of awe and amusement in his voice. I died on my battlefield, and somehow my spirit, my chakra, my memories, they've been waiting inside you, lying dormant. Until your little heart broke so hard it cracked the seal between who you are and who I was. Izuku didn't fully understand the words, but he felt the truth of them resonating in his chest. A strange warmth was beginning to spread from his stomach, flowing through his limbs. It felt like a dormant fire had just been stoked. You're crying because they told you can't be a hero without this quirk thing, right? Jiraiya asked. Izuku nodded miserably. I don't have power. Jiraiya barked a laugh, loud and echoing. No power? Kid, you've got the soul of a Sannin. You don't need whatever a quirk is. You have chakra. The physical and spiritual energy that binds the universe. It's been asleep, but it's there. It's yours now. The legendary ninja stood up, looking down at his small, green-haired reincarnation. Listen to me, Izuku. The world I came from was built on hatred, war, and pain. I spent my whole life looking for a way to break that cycle, to find true peace. I left that task to my student, Naruto. But it looks like the universe isn't done with me yet. Or rather, it's just getting started with you. Jiraiya pressed his large thumb against Izuku's forehead. A blinding, searing white light erupted from the point of contact. Suddenly, decades of memories flooded into Izuku's 4-year-old mind. He saw a hidden village built into the side of a great mountain. He saw 3 children wearing bells. He saw giant toads leaping through the sky, breathing fire. He saw war. He saw blood. He saw the beautiful smile of a woman with blonde hair and a diamond on her forehead. He saw a blonde boy in an orange jumpsuit, screaming his name. He saw pain. He saw failure. But above all, he saw determination. The guts to never give up. Take it all, kid, Jiraiya's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere as his form began to dissolve into golden light, flowing into Izuku's chest. Take my jutsu. Take my experience. Take my ridiculous good looks. Well, maybe you'll grow into those. But most importantly, take my guts. A true ninja, a true hero, isn't one who has the strongest power given to him. A true hero is one who has the guts to never give up, no matter how much the world beats him down. Jiraiya. Izuku whispered, feeling his small body overflow with a power he had never known existed. Live a good life, Izuku Midoriya, the fading voice of the Toad Sage echoed. Write a story even better than mine. And for the love of the gods, do some research along the way. Ha ha! The golden light consumed everything. In the real world, Inko Midoriya was frantically dabbing her son's forehead with a damp cloth. Dr. Tsubasa had moved Izuku to a recovery cot in the back room. He's just suffered a mild syncopal episode, the doctor was explaining, checking his watch. The shock of the diagnosis caused his blood pressure to drop. He'll wake up soon, Mrs. Midoriya. Just give him time. My poor baby, Inko sobbed, clutching her son's small hand. He wanted this so badly. How am I supposed to comfort him when he wakes up? As if on cue, Izuku's fingers twitched. Inko gasped, leaning over the cot. Izuku? Izuku, sweetie, can you hear me? Izuku's eyes fluttered open. But they were not the eyes of a devastated 4-year-old. The irises were still a vibrant emerald green, but there was a profound sharpness to them. A weight, an ancient, worldly mischief that had absolutely no business being on the face of a toddler. Izuku sat up slowly. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for his all-might figure. He looked down at his hands, clenching and unclenching his fists, feeling the faint, dormant thrum of an energy network waking up for the first time in a new body. Izuku? Inko asked hesitantly, unnerved by his silence. Are you okay? Izuku looked at his mother. A wide, boisterous grin stretched across his face, exposing his baby teeth. Suddenly, the boy threw his blanket off. He leaped onto the mattress of the hospital cot. Before Inko or Dr. Tsubasa could stop him, Izuku dropped into a deep, wide stance. He threw his left arm out, pointing dramatically at the ceiling, and brought his right hand up to his face, splaying his fingers over his eyes in a flawless, theatrical kabuki pose. Fear not, mother! Izuku announced, his high-pitched, childish voice completely at odds with the archaic, bombastic cadence he was using. For I am the spirit of the eternal flame, the toad that leaps across the heavens. The one, the only, gallant shinobi, Izuku Midoriya. He snapped his head toward the bewildered doctor, winking dramatically. And you, quack! You may have diagnosed my body, but you cannot diagnose my soul. Yeah! Izuku ended his proclamation by slapping his hands onto his knees and throwing his head back in a thunderous, though distinctly squeaky, laugh. Gahahaha! Inko stared at her son, her jaw hanging slack. She turned slowly to Dr. Tsubasa, horror dawning in her eyes. Doctor. I think the shock broke his brain. Dr. Tsubasa just stared, completely dumbfounded. I will write a referral for a child psychologist. 10 years later, Musudafu Municipal Woods. The dense canopy of the woods at the edge of the city provided the perfect cover. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves in dappled, golden patches, illuminating a small clearing that had clearly seen years of intense, repetitive use. The ground was scarred with burn marks, impact craters, and deep gouges in the earth. Izuku Midoriya, now 14 years old, stood at the base of a towering oak tree. He looked nothing like the frail, skittish boy his classmates believed him to be. Stripped down to a dark gray tank top and loose black cargo pants, his physique was a testament to a decade of relentless, borderline insane physical conditioning. His arms and shoulders were corded with lean, functional muscle. Sweat beaded on his brow, dripping down a face that had lost its baby fat, revealing sharp, determined features. Around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt when in public, hung a simple silver chain carrying a heavy metal plate. He had forged it himself in a junior high metal shop. It was a forehead protector, deeply engraved with a single kanji, hero. Izuku closed his eyes and breathed in, visualizing the intricate network of spiritual and physical energy flowing through his body. Chakra. It had been a grueling 10 years. Waking up with the memories and soul of Jiraiya the Sannin was one thing. Actually executing his techniques in a brand new, completely untrained body was another. Izuku had learned the hard way that his 4-year-old chakra coils were incredibly underdeveloped. When he had first tried to breathe fire in his backyard at age 5, he had merely burped a puff of black smoke and passed out for 3 days, nearly giving Inko a heart attack. Since then, he had approached his training with the analytical mind of Izuku Midoriya and the seasoned wisdom of Jiraiya. He realized quickly that in this world quirks were biological hardware, mutations of genetics that granted specific abilities. They were rigid. Chakra, however, was the software of the soul. It was fluid, versatile, and limited only by one's reserves, control, and imagination. But building those reserves in a world without ambient chakra or a lineage of shinobi took absolute dedication. Izuku raised his hands, bringing his index and middle fingers together in a cross-shaped hand seal. Focus, he told himself. Draw the physical stamina from the cells. Draw the spiritual energy from the mind. Mold them in the stomach. Push it through the coils. He felt the familiar, intoxicating rush of heat bloom in his core. It flowed down his legs, pooling into the soles of his bare feet. A faint, nearly invisible blue aura flickered around his skin. Izuku opened his eyes. He stepped forward and placed his right foot against the vertical trunk of the oak tree. He didn't fall. He brought his left foot up. With measured, confident strides, Izuku walked directly up the side of the tree, defying gravity completely. He walked until he was 50 feet in the air, standing upside down on a thick branch, looking at the world from an inverted perspective. Perfect, Izuku muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Tree walking was foundational chakra control. He had mastered it at age 8, followed quickly by water walking at a secluded section of Dagoba Beach. Over the years, he had slowly, painstakingly rebuilt his arsenal. Taijutsu had come naturally. Muscle memory from his past life guided his new body, teaching him how to punch, kick, parry, and redirect force. Ninjutsu was harder. He had managed to recreate basic fire release. His fire style, flame bullet, was reliable, though nowhere near the massive infernos Jiraiya used to conjure. Earth style was coming along nicely, allowing him to harden his skin or manipulate the ground to a small degree. But his greatest pride was that he had finally managed to reconnect the summoning contract. Izuku dropped from the tree, falling 50 feet. At the last second, he channeled chakra to his feet, landing with a soft, silent thud that didn't even disturb the fallen leaves. He bit his thumb, drawing a drop of blood. He rapidly cycled through 5 hand seals, boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram, and slammed his palm onto the ground. Summoning jutsu, a web of black, intricate script spread over the dirt, followed by a thick cloud of white smoke that smelled faintly of marsh water and ozone. Ribbit. As the smoke cleared, an orange toad the size of a medium dog sat on the ground. He wore a small blue vest and had a perpetually bored expression on his face. "Yo, Izuku," Gamakichi said, lazily scratching his belly. "You called?" Izuku grinned widely, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. "Hey, Gamakichi. Just keeping the connection fresh. How are things at Mount Maiboku?" Same old, Gamakichi replied, pulling out a massive, unlit cigarette and chewing on the end of it. "Pops is still grumpy. The great toad sage is still sleeping. Everyone's still pretty tripped out that you reincarnated into a completely different dimension. Fukasaku says he wants to test your sage mode progress soon, by the way." Izuku grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, about that. Nature energy in this world is weird. It feels thicker. Slower. Whenever I try to draw it in without the old man's help, I start growing warts way too fast. I'm not ready to turn to stone just yet." "Take your time, kid," Gamakichi chuckled. You're only 14. Even in your past life, it took you decades to figure out Sage Mode. Don't rush it. Anyway, you got any snacks? Izuku reached into his backpack and tossed Gamakichi a bag of premium dried insects he had bought from a specialty pet store. The toad caught it with a long tongue, swallowing it whole. You're the best, Izuku. Good luck at school. Catch you later. With a poof of smoke, the toad vanished back to his pocket dimension. Izuku stood up, grabbing his towel and his Aldera junior high uniform. He dressed quickly, making sure to perfectly hide the incredibly toned physique beneath the baggy black uniform. He slipped on his bright red shoes, the only nod to his past life's red Geta sandals he could get away with at school, and slung his yellow backpack over his shoulder. It was time to return to society. It was time to play the role of Deku. Aldera Junior High was, in Izuku's incredibly experienced opinion, a breeding ground for arrogance. He sat at his desk near the back of the classroom, resting his chin on his palm, staring out the window. The teacher at the front was droning on about career aptitude tests, waving a stack of papers in the air. You're all third years now, the teacher announced loudly. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I would hand out these career forms, but who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes, don't you? The classroom erupted in cheers. Students began showing off their quirks, stretching limbs, glowing hands, small bursts of water. It was a cacophony of flashing lights and noise. Izuku didn't cheer. He just observed. Through the lens of a man who had fought in 3 great ninja wars, this display was almost tragically comical. They rely entirely on their quirks, Izuku thought, his eyes scanning the room. No discipline. No martial arts foundation. If a villain neutralized their power, 90% of them would freeze up and die. Hey, teach! Don't lump me in with these background characters. The loud, abrasive voice cut through the chatter like a knife. Izuku didn't have to look to know who it was. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. I'm going to UA High School, Bakugo declared, miniature explosions popping in the palms of his hands. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the #1 hero. I'm the only one in this crappy school who has the stuff, the class murmured in awe. UA was the national standard for hero education, with an acceptance rate of less than 0.2%. The teacher adjusted his glasses. Ah, yes, Bakugo. You're going for UA. But oh, Midoriya? You're applying for UA too, right? The room went dead silent. Every head turned to look at Izuku. For a second, no one moved. Then, the entire class burst into uproarious, mocking laughter. Midoriya? No way. You can't get into the hero course without a quirk. What's he going to do, study the villains to death? Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't shrink into his seat. He simply sat there, a serene, almost lazy smile on his face, tapping his pencil against his notebook. He had long ago decided that letting children bother a man with 50 years of combat experience was beneath him, but Bakugo didn't see it that way. To Bakugo, Izuku's calmness was an insult. For the past 10 years, Deku had stopped crying. He had stopped cowering. Whenever Bakugo pushed him, Deku didn't push back. He just deflected, sidestepped, and looked at Bakugo with those infuriatingly calm, knowing eyes. It drove Bakugo absolutely feral. DKU, Bakugo leaped from his desk. His hand ignited with a massive explosion, aimed directly at Izuku's desk. The blast shattered the wood, sending splintered debris flying. Smoke filled the back of the classroom. The students gasped, expecting to see Izuku charred and whimpering on the floor. As the smoke cleared, Bakugo's crimson eyes widened in shock. Izuku wasn't at his desk. He hadn't been blasted backward. Too slow, Kaken, a calm voice whispered right beside Bakugo's ear. Bakugo whipped around. Izuku was standing flawlessly balanced on the narrow windowsill, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. He had moved the moment Bakugo's muscles tensed, employing the body flicker technique, moving pure physical speed enhanced by a burst of chakra to the legs, to effortlessly dodge the explosion. How the hell did you move that fast? Bakugo roared, swinging a right hook aimed at Izuku's jaw. To the rest of the class, Bakugo's punch was a blur of violence. To Izuku, it was moving in slow motion. He saw the telegraph in Bakugo's shoulder. He saw the shift in his hips. He calculated the trajectory of the fist, and the explosive blast that would follow it. Izuku simply tilted his head 2 inches to the left. Bakugo's fist sailed past Izuku's cheek, missing completely. The momentum threw Bakugo off balance. Without removing his hands from his pockets, Izuku fluidly swept his right foot out, catching Bakugo's ankle. Bakugo tripped, stumbling forward and crashing face first into the ruined remains of Izuku's desk. The classroom was dead silent again. No one could comprehend what had just happened. Quirkless Deku had just made Katsuki Bakugo look like an uncoordinated toddler without even throwing a punch. Izuku sighed softly, stepping down from the windowsill. He looked at Bakugo, who was scrambling to his feet, trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. You really need to work on your footwork, Kaken, Izuku said, his tone infuriatingly gentle, like a master correcting a student. You put all your weight into your upper body to maximize your explosion, but you leave your center of gravity completely exposed. It makes your strikes incredibly predictable. Shut up! Bakugo screamed, explosions popping rapidly in both hands. I'll kill you, you quirkless nobody! Bakugo, that's enough! The teacher finally intervened, clearly terrified of the explosive blonde. Return to your seat. Midoriya grabbed a spare desk from the back. Bakugo glared daggers at Izuku, his chest heaving. This isn't over, Deku. I don't know what kind of tricks you're pulling, but you're dead. Izuku just smiled, a wide, thoroughly Jiraiya-esque grin that showed all his teeth. I'll look forward to it, Kaken. Keep practicing. As Izuku walked to the back of the room to retrieve a new desk, he chuckled internally. He's got fire, I'll give him that. Reminds me a bit of Orochimaru's temper mixed with Tsunade's right hook. If he ever learns to control his anger, he'll be a terrifying shinobi. Or hero. Whatever they call it here. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Izuku packed his bag and slipped out of the classroom before Bakugo could corner him again. He preferred to avoid pointless conflict. He had far more important things to do. Walking home through the bustling streets of Muzurifu, Izuku took his time. He loved observing the city. He loved watching the people, the heroes on patrol, the subtle interactions of everyday life. Jiraiya had always been a wanderer, an author who gathered inspiration from the world around him. Izuku had inherited that trait perfectly. He paused near an electronics store, watching a news broadcast on a display television. The pro-hero Kamiri Woods was tying up a villain who had stolen a purse, while the giant heroine MT Lady swooped in to steal the credit. A crowd of fanboys vigorously snapped photos of MT Lady's posterior. Izuku's sweat dropped, watching the display. Some things never change, no matter what universe you're in, he thought, a slightly perverted smirk creeping onto his face before he violently shook his head. No, bad Jiraiya. Keep it PG-13. I promised Mom I wouldn't become a complete degenerate in this life. He hurried home, arriving at the Midoriya apartment by late afternoon. Inko was still at work, leaving the house quiet. Izuku dropped his bag by the door, took off his shoes, and went straight to his room. It was an incredibly bizarre sanctuary. Half of the room was a shrine to modern heroics. Posters of All Might, limited edition figurines, and analytical notebooks detailing the quirks of hundreds of pro-heroes. The other half looked like it belonged in a feudal Japanese temple. Scrolls of calligraphy, ink brushes, and weights for physical training littered the floor. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and cracked his knuckles. It was time to work on his masterpiece. When Izuku was 12, he had realized that a ninja without income was a hungry ninja. He needed money for training equipment, specialized foods for his body, and materials to practice sealing jutsu. He couldn't ask his mother. Inko worked hard enough as it was. So, he had turned to Jiraiya's oldest, most reliable fallback, writing. Obviously, he couldn't write the infamous Aika Aika, Make Out, series in its original form. Firstly, it was incredibly explicit, and Izuku was a minor. Secondly, this world didn't have shinobi, so the context would be lost. But Izuku was a genius. He took the core elements of Jiraiya's romance writing, the high tension, the dramatic misunderstandings, the passionate, star-crossed lovers, and adapted it to the world of pro-heroes. He toned down the explicit smut, replacing it with agonizingly slow burn romance, intense emotional longing, and steamy, PG-13 kissing scenes set against the backdrop of epic superhero battles. He titled it Ika Ika, Heroics. He published it online under the pen name Gamasenin, Toad Sage. It was a monstrous, viral success. Within a year, a major publisher had reached out to the anonymous author, offering a lucrative print deal. Izuku had his mother sign the contracts, claiming he was just writing hero adventure stories. Inko, completely unaware of the steamy romance within the pages, was just thrilled her son had a hobby that made him happy. Now, at 14, Izuku was a secretly wealthy, published author on his third volume. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was in the zone. "Oh, Crimson Riot," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring flames of the villain's attack. Her hero costume was torn, revealing the delicate slope of her collarbone. "If we don't make it out of this, I need you to know." "Don't speak," he growled, pulling her against his heavily muscled chest, shielding her from the heat. His ruby eyes burned with an intensity hotter than any fire. "We are making it out. And when we do, I'm taking you to dinner." Izuku paused, leaning back in his chair and wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Masterpiece," he whispered to himself. "Absolute cinema. The readers are going to lose their minds." He hit save and closed the laptop. Writing was a great release, but he couldn't sit around all day. The UA entrance exam was only 10 months away. If he was going to walk into the greatest hero academy in the country entirely quirkless, he needed to make a statement. He needed to prove that the age of the shinobi wasn't dead. He stood up, grabbing a worn, leather-bound notebook from his shelf. It wasn't one of his usual hero analysis books. This one had the kanji for Toad painted on the cover. Inside were the blueprints for a custom hero costume, notes on advanced sealing jutsu he was trying to recreate, and a workout regimen that would have broken a normal man in two. "Time for some field research," Izuku muttered. He decided to take a different route for his evening run, heading towards the underpass in the shopping district. It was a longer route, but it offered more varied terrain for his stamina training. He had no idea that beneath that very underpass, a creature made entirely of sentient, vile green sludge was currently fleeing the scene of a robbery, desperately looking for a meat suit to hide in. Nor did he know that the symbol of peace, All Might himself, was currently rocketing through the sky in pursuit. Izuku stepped out of the apartment, the spirit of the Toad Sage thrumming in his veins, entirely unaware that the curtain was about to rise on the greatest tale ever told. The evening air of Muzurifu was thick with the humid, exhaust-choked heat of late spring. Izuku Midoriya was currently ignoring it. He was 5 miles into his evening run, maintaining a grueling, rhythmic pace that would have left most professional athletes gasping for air. Beneath his baggy gray tracksuit, his lungs pumped with measured, deliberate precision. Every footfall on the concrete was perfectly absorbed by the cushioning of his chakra, distributing the kinetic energy so that his joints took zero impact. It was an advanced stamina-building exercise disguised as a simple jog. Breathe in, gather the physical energy from the muscles. Breathe out, fuse it with the spiritual energy of the mind. Izuku's emerald eyes were fixed dead ahead, though his peripheral vision took in everything. A stray cat on a brick wall. A flickering street lamp. The distant wail of a police siren. A shinobi's situational awareness never turned off. It was a survival instinct deeply ingrained in his soul from decades of war and a past life. He turned a corner, his worn red sneakers padding softly onto the pavement as he entered a shadowed underpass. It was a shortcut beneath the main arterial highway of the shopping district. The dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting flickering, jaundiced shadows against the graffiti-stained concrete walls. Suddenly, a foul stench hit Izuku's nose. It smelled like raw sewage mixed with rotting garbage and stagnant river water. Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. His hand instinctively reached for a kunai pouch on his thigh that wasn't there. He settled for dropping his center of gravity, his feet spreading shoulder-width apart. "Behind me," his instinct screamed. A medium-sized meat suit. A gurgling, wet voice rasped from the darkness. "Perfect. You'll make a great disguise, kid. Just hold still for about 45 seconds. It'll only hurt until you can't breathe." A massive geyser of dark green, viscous sludge erupted from the manhole cover a few feet away. The fluid coalesced, forming two bulbous, manic eyes and a jagged mouth filled with rotting teeth. The sludge villain lunged forward, extending a massive, gelatinous tendril meant to wrap around Izuku's mouth and nose. Any normal 14-year-old would have frozen in terror. Izuku Midoriya didn't even blink. He didn't have a quirk, but he had something much faster, muscle memory forged in the fires of the second and third great ninja wars. In a fraction of a second, Izuku cycled through his chakra network. The tendril of sludge slammed into him, wrapping tightly around his torso and face. The villain cackled, thinking he had secured his hostage. Poof! A cloud of white smoke exploded beneath the underpass. The villain blinked, coughing as the smoke cleared. Instead of a struggling teenage boy in a tracksuit, the villain was now aggressively strangling a discarded, moldy wooden pallet that had been leaning against the wall of the underpass. What the? A substitution quirk? The villain gurgled, confused. Not a quirk, a calm voice echoed from above. The villain looked up. Izuku was standing completely upside down on the curved concrete ceiling of the underpass, his feet firmly attached to the stone via a localized concentration of chakra. He was looking down at the villain with an expression of profound boredom. You've got a lot of openings, you know, Izuku said, bringing his hands together in a rapid blur of motion. Serpent, ram, monkey, boar, horse, tiger. Izuku took a deep breath, his chest expanding as he molded fiery chakra in his stomach. He didn't want to kill the guy, nor did he want to melt the concrete structure of the underpass, so he dialed the output back to a mere 5%. Fire style, flame bullet. Izuku spat a condensed, spherical projectile of blazing orange fire. It shot downward like a comet, slamming directly into the center of the sludge villain's fluid mass. The heat was instantaneous and intense. Gaia! The villain shrieked as the intense heat instantly vaporized a large chunk of his liquid body, turning it into thick, foul-smelling steam. The impact threw the villain backward, splattering him against the wall. Izuku prepared to drop down and find a container to seal the remaining sludge into, but a sudden, massive gust of wind roared through the tunnel, rattling the chain-link fences outside. Fear not, citizen! A voice like a booming thunderclap echoed through the underpass. A colossal figure materialized at the entrance of the tunnel, silhouetted by the evening light. He wore a white t-shirt and green cargo pants, but his musculature was so immense he looked like a walking mountain. Two large tufts of blonde hair stood up like rabbit ears on his head. All Might had arrived. Because I am here. The symbol of peace bellowed. The sludge villain, still smoking and regenerating from Izuku's fireball, let out a shriek of absolute terror. He lashed out with a desperate, sweeping attack, sending a wave of sludge toward the number one hero. All Might simply pulled his right arm back. The air pressure around his fist visibly distorted. Texas smash! He threw the punch. He didn't even make contact with the villain. The sheer concussive force of the wind pressure created by his fist hit the villain like a freight train. The underpass howled as a miniature hurricane tore through it. The sludge villain was completely blown apart, splattering into hundreds of unmoving, gelatinous droplets across the ceiling, walls, and floor. Izuku, still standing upside down on the ceiling, was caught in the periphery of the shockwave. He had to channel extra chakra to his feet just to keep from being blown out the other side of the tunnel. Incredible, Izuku thought, his veteran eyes analyzing the display. That wasn't chakra. That wasn't nature energy. That was purely physical strength displacing the air. Reminds me of Tsunade when she's really pissed off, or that crazy kid from the Eight Gates lineage. Guy, was it? The wind died down. All Might stood tall, wiping a spot of dirt from his cheek. He looked up, finally noticing the green-haired boy standing effortlessly on the ceiling. For a second, the symbol of peace just stared. All Might said, his booming voice faltering for half a second. Excellent quirk, young man. Wall clinging? And did you use a fire attack earlier? Good job holding him off. But you can come down now. It's safe. Izuku released his chakra and dropped, landing in a perfect crouch before standing up and dusting off his tracksuit. He looked at All Might. This was the hero he had worshipped since he was a toddler, the man who had shaped his entire view of heroics in this new world. But Izuku didn't pull out a notebook. He didn't stammer. He simply offered a respectful, measured bow. Thank you for the assist, All Might, Izuku said, his voice calm and mature. I had him cornered, but I didn't have a vessel to contain him. Your wind pressure practically pulverized his viscosity. Very efficient. All Might blinked. This teenager wasn't screaming for an autograph. He was giving a tactical after-action report. Yes. Thank you, young citizen. All Might laughed heartily, quickly producing 2 empty 2-liter soda bottles from his grocery bag. He began rapidly scooping the unconscious Sludge into them. I must be off now. Justice never sleeps, and these bottles need to get to the police station. All Might secured the bottles in his pockets, crouched down, and prepared to leap. Wait, Izuku said, his eyes narrowing. No time to wait. All Might bellowed, and with a shockwave that cracked the pavement, he launched himself into the sky, disappearing over the buildings in a parabolic arc. Izuku sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked down at the puddle near his feet. A third of the Sludge villain was still congealing there. All Might had missed a piece in his haste. Idiot, Izuku muttered. Never leave a battlefield without confirming the kill, or in this case, the capture. Without hesitation, Izuku formed the rammed seal. He channeled chakra to his legs and used the body flicker technique. He vanished from the underpass in a blur of motion, leaping up the side of the nearest apartment building to the rooftops. He tracked the massive displacement of air All Might was creating. The hero wasn't hard to follow. Izuku bounded across the rooftops like a phantom, skipping over gaps between buildings with gravity-defying grace. A few blocks away, Izuku saw All Might touch down on the roof of a 3-story commercial building. Izuku landed silently on a water tower just above him, preparing to hop down and tell the hero he dropped something. But before he could speak, a sickening sound echoed across the roof. Cough. It was a wet, agonizing, rattling sound. Izuku watched as steam suddenly erupted from All Might's massive body. The hulking, mountain-like physique rapidly deflated, shrinking inward like a popped balloon. Within seconds the symbol of peace was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken, shadowed eyes, wearing clothes that hung off his bony frame like a scarecrow. The man was hunched over, hacking violently, a thin trail of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. Izuku froze. His emerald eyes widened, but not in terror. In recognition. I know that look, Izuku thought, a phantom ache blooming in his own chest, right where pain used to reside in his past life. That's the look of a man living on borrowed time, a man whose body is failing him, but his will refuses to let him die. Izuku silently hopped down from the water tower, landing a few feet behind the skeletal man. You missed the spot, Izuku said quietly. Toshinori Yagi jumped nearly out of his skin. He whipped around, his sunken blue eyes wide with absolute panic. He wiped the blood from his chin, staring at the green-haired boy from the underpass. Wait! You! Toshinori stammered, frantically waving his bony hands. How did you get up here? Listen, I can explain. I'm not a fake. You know how guys flex at the pool to look bigger? It's like that. I'm All Might, I swear. He waited for the boy to scream. To panic. To shatter into a million pieces at the revelation that the invincible symbol of peace was a frail, dying man. But Izuku just stared at him. The boy's eyes, previously bright and youthful, had darkened into something impossibly old. They were the eyes of a hardened combat medic, scanning a wounded comrade on the battlefield. Izuku walked forward slowly, entirely ignoring Toshinori's frantic excuses. He stopped right in front of the pro-hero, left side. Respiratory system compromised. Severe damage to the stomach and digestive tract, Izuku noted, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into the authoritative tone of Jiraiya the Sannin. I can smell the necrotic tissue from here. Multiple surgeries. You're missing a lung, aren't you? Toshinori was stunned into silence. He stumbled back a step. How do you know that? I've seen my fair share of fatal wounds, old man, Izuku said softly, pulling a small, corked vial from one of his cargo pockets. A wound like that, a toxic attack? No, blunt force trauma with a piercing element. 5, maybe 6 years ago? Toshinori's breath hitched. He slumped against the chain-link fence bordering the roof, utterly defeated. 5 years ago. Yes. A fight with a villain, one the public never heard about. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed. I lost my entire stomach. After repeated surgeries, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. He looked down at his skeletal hands, a bitter, self-deprecating smile on his face. A pathetic sight, isn't it? The symbol of peace, nothing but a rotting shell. You must be deeply disappointed, young man. I ask that you do not speak of this online. If the public knows, the deterrence factor you provide will shatter, and crime will skyrocket as the wolves realize the sheepdog is missing its teeth. Izuku finished for him. Toshinori looked up, shocked by the boy's sharp, tactical understanding of societal geopolitics. Why, yes. Exactly, Izuku sighed. He popped the cork off the small vial he was holding. He extended it toward Toshinori. Drink this, Izuku commanded. Toshinori blinked. What is it? A tincture I made? Mount Mayaboka marshweed, crushed ginger, and a little bit of chakra-infused toad oil. It tastes like absolute garbage, but it will coat the lining of your remaining digestive tract, reduce the inflammation, and stop the internal bleeding for a few hours. Drink it. Toshinori hesitated, but there was an invisible, suffocating pressure emanating from this teenager. An aura of absolute, undeniable authority. It was the same aura Toshinori felt when his master, Nana Shimura, used to scold him. Without thinking, Toshinori took the vial and downed it. He instantly gagged. Ugh! Good lord, that tastes like stagnant pond water. I told you it was garbage, Izuku smirked, crossing his arms. But a moment later, Toshinori's eyes widened. The ever-present, burning agony in his left side, a pain he had lived with every second for 5 years, suddenly dulled into a manageable warmth. His breathing eased. The coppery taste of blood in his throat vanished. This is incredible, Toshinori breathed. Is this your quirk? Healing? You said you didn't have a container for the villain. I don't have a quirk, Izuku said plainly, walking over to the edge of the roof and looking out over the city. Toshinori joined him, leaning heavily on the railing. No quirk? But you were on the ceiling. And the fire, a martial art. An old one. Takes a lot of practice, Izuku lied smoothly, though it wasn't entirely a lie. Listen, All Might. You don't need to apologize for being injured. A shinobi, a hero, who puts his life on the line for others is bound to catch a mortal wound eventually. It's the nature of the job. You carry the weight of this entire society's peace on your shoulders. It's a heavy burden. But you're carrying it alone. That's your mistake. Toshinori stared at the boy's profile against the setting sun. The light caught Izuku's wild green hair. For a brief, insane moment, Toshinori felt like he was talking to an ancient sage, not a middle schooler in a tracksuit. Who are you? Toshinori asked softly. Just a kid hoping to get into UA, Izuku smiled, turning back to the hero. The ancient aura vanished, replaced by the bright, cheerful demeanor of a 14-year-old. I'll keep your secret, All Might. I know how important it is. But you really need to go back and get the rest of that Sludge guy. You left a puddle of him back in the underpass. Toshinori's face drained of color. He instinctively reached into his cargo pockets. He patted his right pocket. Empty. He patted his left. Empty. Oh my God, Toshinori whispered, terror gripping his heart. When I grabbed you, when I jumped, they must have slipped out. A massive, concussive boom suddenly rattled the windows of the buildings around them. A plume of thick, black smoke began to rise into the twilight sky from the shopping district a few blocks away. Izuku's eyes narrowed. He recognized the sound of that explosion. It was sharp, crackling with nitroglycerin. Kakin, Izuku muttered. I dropped them, Toshinori said, gripping his head in his hands, trembling. The bottles. I dropped them in the city. And I'm out of time. I can't transform. I can't. Izuku didn't wait to hear the rest of the hero's lament. He surged with chakra, his body blurring out of existence as he utilized the body flicker technique once more, leaving a gust of wind in his wake. Toshinori was left alone on the roof, staring in awe at the space the boy had just occupied. Gritting his teeth, ignoring the protest of his broken body, the skeletal hero began to frantically run toward the smoke. Tatooine shopping district was a war zone, Fire raged across the storefronts, shattering glass and melting steel. A massive crowd of onlookers had gathered behind a police barricade, watching in horror. In the center of the inferno, the Sludge villain had reformed. He was twice as large as before, having absorbed moisture from the surrounding sewer grates. But worse than his size was his hostage. Trapped within the center of the sludge was Katsuki Bakugo. The blonde boy was suffocating, his eyes wide with fury and panic. In his desperate attempt to break free, Bakugo was firing off massive explosions from his palms, but the blasts only fueled the surrounding fires, making it impossible for the pro-heroes to approach. Death Arms, a hero with super strength, tried to punch the sludge, but his fists sank harmlessly into the liquid. Kamui Woods was useless, his wooden tendrils highly susceptible to Bakugo's fire. Empty Lady was too large to navigate the narrow two-lane street. It's no good. Death Arms shouted, coughing from the smoke. He's grabbed a kid with a powerful quirk. We can't get close. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Tashinori arrived at the back of the crowd, clutching a telephone pole for support. He watched the scene unfold, his heart shattering into a million pieces. It's my fault, Tashinori thought, digging his nails into his chest. I was careless. I let my ego blind me. And now, a child is going to die, and I am too weak to save him. Pathetic. Pathetic. We just have to wait. Kamui Woods yelled to the crowd. Someone will come. Wait. The word echoed in the air. At the edge of the police barricade, Izuku Midoriya had just arrived. He heard the heroes. He saw them standing there, watching a child suffocate. Inside Izuku's mind, Jiraiya's memories flared to life. He remembered watching Orochimaru slip away because he hesitated. He remembered arriving too late to save Minato and Kushina. He remembered the cold, bitter ash of regret. A hero, Jiraiya's voice echoed in his soul, does not wait. Before his conscious mind could even process the decision, Izuku moved. He ducked under the yellow police tape and sprinted directly into the inferno. Hey! Kid, stop! You'll get yourself killed! Death Arms roared, reaching out to grab him, but Izuku was moving too fast. Izuku's red sneakers slammed against the pavement, propelling him forward. The heat of the fire licked at his tracksuit, but he channeled a thin layer of chakra across his skin to insulate himself from the burns. The sludge villain saw him coming. You! The villain roared. The brat from the underpass. I'll drown you both. The villain whipped a massive tendril of sludge at Izuku's head. Izuku didn't slow down. He slid on his knees, arching his back backward matrix style, the tendril passing mere inches over his nose. He snapped back up, pushing off his hands and continuing his sprint. He locked eyes with Bakugo. The blonde boy was fading fast, his explosions growing weaker. What am I doing? Izuku's conscious mind finally caught up to his body. I can't use fire style here. I'll roast Kaken alive. I can't use Ura style, it won't break the viscosity. I need blunt force. I need concussive rotation to scatter the fluid without harming the center. There was only one technique. A technique Izuku had practiced in this new body but had never fully mastered. His chakra coils were still adapting. It required absolute shape transformation, an A-rank jutsu that took the 4th Hokage 3 years to create. To hell with it, Izuku thought. I'm the Toad Sage. Izuku leaped into the air, closing the distance between himself and the towering villain. He thrust his right hand out. He didn't use shadow clones. He didn't have time. He forced his chakra out of his palm. Step 1, rotation. Izuku visualized a swirling maelstrom of energy. A chaotic vortex of blue chakra began to spin wildly in the palm of his hand. Step 2, power. He poured more energy into it, expanding the vortex. The sheer friction of the unrefined chakra began to burn the skin of his palm. Izuku gritted his teeth, ignoring the searing pain. Step 3, containment. He forced the chaotic storm into a sphere. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the smooth, glowing blue orb of his past life. It was jagged, unstable, and sparking with violent, screeching energy. It sounded like 1,000 birds screaming inside a blender. The crowd fell dead silent, watching the quirkless boy fall toward the monster with a miniature hurricane in his hand. Toshinori Yagi's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. What is that power? Let him go! Izuku roared. Izuku slammed his right hand directly into the thickest part of the sludge villain, just inches away from Bakugo's face. Rasengan! The impact was cataclysmic. The unstable, rotational force of the unrefined jutsu acted like a meat grinder. It caught the sludge and violently spun it outwards at supersonic speeds. A spiraling shockwave erupted from Izuku's hand, tearing through the street. The air pressure wasn't as massive as All Might's Texas Smash, but the targeted rotation was devastating. The sludge villain was instantly ripped to shreds, his fluid body spiraling out in a massive, splatter-painted spiral that plastered against the brick walls of the surrounding buildings. The vacuum created by the jutsu sucked the surrounding flames inward, extinguishing the fires in the immediate vicinity in a single, explosive breath. Bakugo, suddenly freed from his liquid prison, gasped for air and fell forward. Izuku, his right hand smoking and covered in second-degree friction burns, caught Bakugo by the collar of his uniform. He landed smoothly on his feet, holding his childhood bully up. The street was dead silent. The villain was defeated, splattered across the pavement. The fires were out. And a 14-year-old boy in a tracksuit was standing in the center of the wreckage, panting softly. You idiot! Bakugo coughed, staring at Izuku with a mixture of absolute rage and profound bewilderment. What was that? Izuku looked down at his ruined right hand, wincing slightly. Looks like I still need to work on the containment phase. Hurt like a bitch. Then, the crowd erupted. Cheers deafened the street. The pro-heroes shook off their shock and rushed forward. Kamui Woods quickly began gathering the splattered remains of the villain, while Death Arms marched aggressively toward Izuku. What were you thinking, kid? Death Arms yelled, grabbing Izuku by the shoulder. That was incredibly reckless. You could have been killed. You interfered with official hero business. Do you have a license to use that quirk? Izuku slowly turned his head to look at Death Arms. The warm, heroic aura Izuku had just displayed vanished instantly, replaced by the suffocating, heavy killing intent of a veteran shinobi. Death Arms instinctively let go of the boy's shoulder, taking a step back, suddenly feeling very, very cold. Official hero business? Izuku repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He looked at Death Arms, then at Kamui Woods, then at Empty Lady. A kid was dying, Izuku said, pointing at Bakugo, who was currently being checked by paramedics. He was suffocating, and you three professionals stood there and watched because your quirks weren't perfectly suited for the situation. We were assessing the tactical, Kamui Woods started. You were hesitating, Izuku cut him off, his voice slicing through the air like a kunai. You rely so heavily on your quirks that you've forgotten your humanity. If your quirk doesn't work, you give up. You wait for someone else. Tell me, if that boy had died while you were assessing, would you have told his mother that your quirk just wasn't the right fit? The three pro-heroes looked at the ground, utterly shamed by a middle schooler. Izuku sighed, the heavy aura dissipating. He rubbed his uninjured left hand through his spiky green hair. A true hero doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. A true hero moves when someone is crying out for help. Remember that, before you try to lecture me again. Without waiting for a response, or the police to take his statement, Izuku turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop him. He just wanted to go home and put some burned cream on his hand. The sun had fully set by the time Izuku was walking through a quiet, residential neighborhood on his way home. The streetlights cast long, solitary shadows across the pavement. His right hand was wrapped in a makeshift bandage he had fashioned from the hem of his tracksuit shirt. I pushed the coils in my arm too hard, Izuku analyzed mentally. It wasn't a true Rasengan. It was just a condensed ball of spinning chakra. Still, it did the trick. I'll need to focus on shape transformation exercises for the next few months. DKU. Izuku stopped. He didn't turn around. Katsuki Bakugo came stomping down the street, his breathing heavy, his fists clenched at his sides. He stopped a few feet away from Izuku, his crimson eyes burning with a complex mix of humiliation, anger, and confusion. I didn't ask for your help, Bakugo snarled, his voice trembling slightly. I had him. I was softening him up with my explosions. I didn't need a quirkless nobody jumping in to save me. Don't you dare think this makes you better than me, you hear? You're still nothing. You hear me? Bakugo turned on his heel and stomped away, his pride wounded but intact, retreating before Izuku could even respond. Izuku watched him go, a small, genuine smile on his face. He's a brat, but he's got the spirit. He'll be a fine hero once he gets that stick out of his. I am here! A massive figure suddenly shot out from a nearby alleyway, landing right in front of Izuku with a flex of his colossal muscles. Izuku jumped, genuinely startled for the first time all day. Geez! All Might? What are you doing? I thought your time limit was up. All Might stood tall for exactly 2 seconds before a violently coughing fit overtook him. Steam erupted, and once again, the skeletal Toshinori Yagi stood before Izuku, wiping blood from his chin. Ah. Yes. I pushed it a bit, Toshinori wheezed, leaning against a brick wall. But I had to find you. I had to thank you, young man. And I had to apologize. Izuku frowned, crossing his arms. Apologize? For dropping the bottles? For that, yes, Toshinori said, looking deeply into Izuku's eyes. But mostly, for what happened at the scene. You told me earlier that I carry the burden alone. You were right. When I saw that villain, when I saw that boy dying, I hesitated. I was terrified of pushing my broken body any further. I acted exactly like those heroes you scolded. Toshinori pushed himself off the wall, standing as straight as his gaunt frame would allow. He bowed his head deeply to Izuku. I am the symbol of peace, Toshinori said, his voice thick with emotion. But today, a 14-year-old boy showed me what true heroism looks like. Your body moved before your mind could think, didn't it? Izuku's eyes softened. He remembered the exact feeling. Yeah. It did. That is the mark of a great hero, Toshinori smiled, looking up. Most of the top heroes in the world, their stories all start the same way. Their bodies moved on their own. Izuku stood silently, listening. You told me you don't have a quirk, Toshinori continued, his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering light. You used a martial art. A technique. But you lack the raw, genetic power that society demands. Well, I have a proposition for you, young man. I deem you worthy. Toshinori pointed a bony finger at Izuku. Worthy to inherit my power. Izuku blinked. Once. Twice. Inherit your power? What do you mean? Quirks are biological. You can't just pass them around like a cold. Mine is different, Toshinori grinned. It is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation. A crystalline network of power, cultivated by the brave, and handed to the next worthy successor. It is called One for All. Toshinori began to explain the history of the quirk. The stockpiling of power. The transfer. The immense physical toll it took to wield. He explained that he was the 8th wielder, and his time was running out. He needed a 9th. He needed a hero with the heart of a lion to take up the mantle of the symbol of peace. So, young man, Toshinori concluded, holding out his hand. Will you accept my power? Will you become the next symbol of peace? Izuku stood in the quiet street, looking at Toshinori's outstretched hand. It was the ultimate dream. The number one hero, offering his undisputed, godlike power on a silver platter. With One for All, Izuku wouldn't have to painstakingly rebuild his chakra network. He wouldn't have to hide. He could blast through the UA entrance exams and become the undisputed strongest hero in the world. It was the easy way. Izuku smiled. He reached out and gently pushed Toshinori's hand down. I'm deeply honored, All Might. Truly, Izuku said softly, his voice echoing with the profound respect of a fellow warrior. But I have to decline. Toshinori's jaw practically hit the pavement. Decline? But why? I saw your heart. I saw your bravery. You have the spirit of a hero. I do, Izuku nodded. But I don't need your quirk to prove it. I told you, I have my own path. My own power. He looked down at his bandaged right hand. It's unrefined. It's difficult. It takes years of agonizing practice. But it's mine. If I take your power, I'd be abandoning the legacy I was born to cultivate. Izuku looked back up, his emerald eyes shining with a fiery, unyielding determination. Besides, Izuku chuckled, slipping back into the playful demeanor of a teen. Your quirk stockpiles raw physical strength, right? Looking at my body, if I took that much power right now, my limbs would probably blow right off. Tashinori couldn't argue with that logic, though his mind was still reeling from the rejection. But the world needs a symbol. If not you, then who? You'll find someone, Izuku said confidently, placing a hand on Tashinori's bony shoulder. Someone who has the heart, but truly has no other options. Someone who needs that power to fly. I already have a way to reach the sky. Tashinori looked at the boy, realizing that this wasn't an act of arrogance. It was an act of profound self-awareness and quiet confidence. This boy didn't need one for all because he was already destined for something entirely different. I understand, Tashinori sighed, a small smile returning to his face. You are an incredibly strange young man, Midoriya. But I respect your choice. I'll still keep your secret, Izuku promised. And hey, if you ever need more of that marshweed tincture to help with the pain, let me know. I've got a whole greenhouse of weird plants growing on my balcony. Tashinori laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that didn't end in a bloody cough. I may take you up on that. You are applying to UA, correct? That's the plan. Then I look forward to seeing you there, Tashinori said, bowing slightly. Train hard, Izuku Midoriya. Show the world this power of yours. I will, Izuku grinned, turning to walk down the street. He didn't look back as he headed home. His hand burned, his muscles ached, and he had a massive amount of homework to finish before he could even look at his manuscript. But as he looked up at the moon hanging in the night sky, Izuku felt a thrill of excitement course through his chakra network. The symbol of peace had acknowledged him. He had proven to himself that the fire of the Toad Sage still burned brightly in his soul. 10 months to the entrance exam, Izuku thought, stretching his arms over his head. Time to kick this training into high gear. I wonder if Gamabunta will let me summon him yet? Probably not. He's a cranky old bastard. Izuku laughed into the night, the sound echoing through the quiet streets, a prelude to the storm that was about to hit the world of heroes. The salt-tinged breeze of Dagoba Municipal Beach carried the scent of rusted metal, rotting seaweed, and the distinct, ozone-like crackle of heavily compressed energy. 10 months had passed since the incident with the Sludge villain. 10 months since Izuku Midoriya had respectfully declined the godlike power of the symbol of peace, choosing instead to walk the arduous, unpaved road of the shinobi. The beach, notorious for being an illegal dumping ground, was a labyrinth of towering trash heaps, broken appliances, and rusted car frames. For an aspiring hero, it was a tragedy. For the reincarnated Toad Sage, it was the perfect playground. Izuku stood atop a massive, crushed refrigerator, his chest heaving. Sweat poured down his torso, matting his unruly green hair to his forehead. It was 4 a.m. The sky above was a bruised purple, the stars just beginning to fade against the encroaching dawn. Again, Izuku panted, his breath pluming in the cool morning air. He closed his eyes and looked inward. In this life, his chakra coils had been dormant for 4 years, and slowly coaxed awake over the next 10. But to perform the high-level jutsu required to pass the UA entrance exam, slow and steady wasn't going to cut it anymore. He needed explosive capacity. He needed to stretch his coils to their absolute limits without tearing them. He formed the ram's seal, channeling his spiritual and physical energies, molding them perfectly in his stomach. Summoning requires a massive toll of raw chakra, proportional to the mass and power of the entity being summoned, Izuku reminded himself, Jiraiya's decades of wisdom guiding his thoughts. If I try to pull Gamabunta right now, the chakra drain will literally turn me into a dried husk. I have to start smaller. Find the exact threshold of my current reserves. Izuku bit his thumb, the sharp pain a familiar, grounding sensation. He smeared a line of blood across his left palm. His hands moved in a blur, completing the sequence in less than 2 seconds. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. He dropped from the refrigerator, channeling chakra into his feet to cushion the fall, and slammed his bloody palm into the sand. Summoning jutsu. A web of intricate, black sealing script exploded outward from his hand, crawling across the sand like striking vipers. A resounding poof echoed across the quiet beach, accompanied by a massive plume of white smoke that smelled heavily of marsh weed and ancient magic. Izuku stumbled back, falling onto his rear, gasping for air as his chakra reserves plummeted to dangerously low levels. His vision blurred for a second, black spots dancing at the edges of his sight. As the smoke cleared, a shadow loomed within it. "Man, you really cut it close that time, kid." Sitting on the sand, casually leaning against a rusted washing machine, was a toad the size of a large dog. His skin was a vibrant, fiery orange with dark purple markings. He wore a small, open blue vest, and resting in the corner of his wide mouth was an unlit, oversized cigarette. Izuku blinked the exhaustion away and offered a weak, but triumphant grin. "Gamakichi. I actually pulled you through." Gamakichi lazily scratched his belly with a webbed hand. "Yeah, barely. I felt the tug on the contract and thought, oh, the kid's finally putting his back into it. But let me tell you, the dimensional friction between Mount Mayaboku and this world is no joke. It takes twice as much chakra to pull us here than it did in the old world." "I figured," Izuku grunted, pushing himself up to a sitting position. "My coils are burning. But I need to be able to summon reliable backup for the practical exam today. I can't rely purely on taijutsu and low-level elemental releases. I need heavy hitters." Gamakichi hopped forward, looking Izuku up and down. The toad's slit-like pupils softened slightly. "You've grown a lot in 10 months, Izuku. Your physique is solid. You've got the muscle density of a seasoned chunin. But you're only 15. Your chakra network is still maturing. Don't push it. If you try to summon Pops right now, you'll die." "I know," Izuku sighed, pulling a water bottle from his backpack and taking a long swig. "Gamabunta is off the table. What about Gamahiro? If I run into something massive, I might need his swords." "Hiro?" Gamakichi puffed out a breath of air. "Maybe. If you dump 90% of your reserves into the seal, you might be able to drag him out for about 3 minutes before the connection snaps. But you'd be running on fumes afterward." 3 minutes is a lifetime on the battlefield," Izuku smiled, pushing himself to his feet. He stretched his arms over his head, feeling the satisfying pop of his joints. "Thanks, Gamakichi. I'll see you later today. Don't do anything stupid, kid. And for the love of the sage, stop writing those embarrassing romance novels. The older toads read them and won't stop gossiping." Izuku flushed bright red. Ika. Heroics is a literary masterpiece. The prose is immaculate." Gamakichi just rolled his eyes, formed a one-handed seal, and vanished in a puff of white smoke. Izuku stood alone on the beach as the sun finally crested the horizon, casting brilliant hues of orange and gold across the water. Today was the day he stepped out of the shadows and showed the world that true power didn't come from a genetic lottery. A few hours later, the Midoriya household was in a state of chaotic anxiety. "Izuku, do you have your pencils? Your eraser? Your registration card? Did you pack a lunch?" Inko Midoriya fluttered around the small kitchen like a panicked bird, wringing a dish towel in her hands. "Yes, Mom, I have everything," Izuku laughed softly, stepping out of his bedroom. Inko turned, freezing mid-panic. She stared at her son, her jaw dropping slightly. Izuku was wearing his standard black Aldera junior high uniform, baggy trousers and a high-collar jacket. But draped over his shoulders was a striking, custom-made Haori coat. It was a deep, vibrant crimson red, falling just past his waist, with short, wide sleeves. On the back, perfectly embroidered in bold black thread, was the kanji for gallant. But that wasn't the strangest part. Instead of his signature red sneakers, Izuku was wearing traditional wooden Geta sandals, the 2 teeth of the footwear elevating him a few inches off the ground. "Izuku, honey," Inko stammered. "What are you wearing?" "The letter said to wear your school uniform." "I am wearing my school uniform," Izuku smiled cheerfully, adjusting the collar of the red Haori. "This is just an accessory. A shinobi, or a hero, needs to have a recognizable silhouette, right? Besides, the Geta are excellent for balance training." Inko looked deeply uncertain. She knew her son had changed profoundly since that day in the doctor's office 10 years ago. He was intensely focused, endlessly energetic, and occasionally struck bizarre theatrical poses when he thought no one was looking. But he was also kind, respectful, and so fiercely driven that she couldn't bring herself to stifle his eccentricities. "Just don't trip during the practical, okay?" Inko sighed, walking over and adjusting the haori on his shoulders. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You've worked so hard for this, Izuku. I'm so proud of you. Quirk or no quirk, you are already my hero. Izuku's heart swelled. He wrapped his arms around his mother, hugging her tightly. Thanks, Mom. I won't let you down. The gates of UA High School were monolithic. They towered over the arriving examinees, an imposing structure of steel and glass that practically radiated prestige. Izuku stood at the base of the steps, looking up at the H-shaped main building. Impressive, he thought, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. It doesn't quite have the rustic charm of the Hidden Leaf gates, but it definitely serves its purpose. It's designed to intimidate. Click. Clack. Click. Clack. Izuku began his ascent, the wooden Geta sandals echoing loudly against the pristine concrete pavement. He garnered plenty of stares. In a sea of standard, muted middle school uniforms, a green-haired boy wearing a violently red haori and traditional wooden sandals stood out like a sore thumb. Hey! What the hell do you think you're wearing, you damn nerd? Izuku didn't flinch. He recognized that gravelly, explosive voice instantly. He turned to his left to see Katsuki Bakugo storming toward him, his hands stuffed aggressively into his pockets, his crimson eyes narrowed in sheer irritation. Good morning to you too, Kaken, Izuku beamed, offering a theatrical, two-fingered salute. Don't give me that. Bakugo snapped, stopping inches from Izuku's face. You look like a walking circus act. Do you think this is a joke? UA is the proving ground for the best of the best. If you're going to show up to die, at least wear proper shoes. Izuku simply smiled, a serene, unbothered expression that he knew drove Bakugo absolutely insane. These shoes are perfectly proper, Kaken. They train the calves, enforce perfect posture, and ensure my center of gravity is always aligned. You should try a pair. It might help with that horrific slouch of yours. Bakugo's eye twitched. Tiny sparks ignited in his palms. I'll kill you. Save it for the exam, Izuku replied smoothly, turning back toward the entrance. Bakugo huffed, stomping past Izuku with unnecessary force. Izuku watched him go with a fond chuckle. 10 months had done nothing to mellow Bakugo out, but Izuku could sense the underlying current of anxiety in the blonde's chakra. Even the explosive prodigy was nervous about UA. Izuku resumed his walk. He was halfway to the doors when he heard a sharp gasp behind him. He turned around just in time to see a girl with short, round, chestnut-brown hair tripping over her own feet. She was pitching forward, her face destined to intimately meet the unforgiving concrete. Izuku didn't think. He simply moved. He channeled a microscopic burst of chakra to his calves, executing a fraction of the body flicker technique. To the naked eye, he simply vanished from his spot and materialized right beside the fallen girl. He caught her gently by the upper arm with his left hand, while his right hand smoothly swept around her waist, arresting her fall instantly. He completely absorbed her momentum without stumbling, holding her suspended a few inches above the ground. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. When it didn't come, she slowly peeled one eye open. Izuku leaned in slightly, a roguish, impossibly charming smile on his face, a smile practiced over decades by a man who considered himself God's gift to women, heavily refined to be socially acceptable for a 15-year-old. Careful there, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a smooth, warm cadence. Gravity may be a constant, but it certainly doesn't suit a beautiful flower like you falling so early in the morning. The girl's face instantly erupted in a shade of red that rivaled Izuku's haori. Aye. She stammered, her hands waving frantically. Thank you. I tripped, and my quirk, well, I usually use it to float, but I panicked. Izuku helped her stand upright, releasing her waist but maintaining a gentlemanly hold on her arm until she was balanced. A floating quirk? How fascinating. But try to rely on your own 2 feet first. Quirks can fail, but a good foundation never will. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to meet you. Achiko Uraraka. She squeaked, still incredibly flustered by the swift catch and the bizarre, charming way this boy spoke. She looked at his outfit, taking in the red coat and wooden sandals. You look really cool. Like a wandering samurai. Izuku threw his head back and laughed, a loud, boisterous sound that turned a few more heads. Samurai? No, no! Think more stealthy! More gallant! Good luck on the exam, Uraraka. With a theatrical wink, Izuku turned and walked away, his Geta sandals click-clacking all the way to the door, leaving a very red, very confused Uraraka in his wake. The written portion of the exam was a breeze. Izuku possessed the combined intellect of a top-tier middle school student who obsessively analyzed hero tactics, and a seasoned tactician who had commanded shinobi platoons. The questions on quirk law, rescue logistics, and situational ethics were child's play. The orientation, however, was a completely different beast. Izuku sat in the massive, dimly lit auditorium, sandwiched between Bakugo and a very anxious-looking boy with messy purple hair. Up on the grand stage, bathed in a spotlight, was the voice hero, Present Mike. Everybody say hey. Mike screamed into his microphone, the sound system of the auditorium amplifying his quirk to deafening levels. Silence. Absolute, pin-drop silence from the hundreds of nervous teenagers. Wow, tough crowd. Mike recovered flawlessly. All right, examinees. Let's get right into the meat of it. Today, you'll be conducting a 10-minute mock urban battle in our state-of-the-art training centers. Mike pressed a button, and a holographic screen appeared behind him, displaying silhouettes of 3 different robots. You'll be facing 3 types of foe villains. The 1-pointer, the 2-pointer, and the 3-pointer. Your goal is to use your quirks to incapacitate them and rack up as many points as possible, but no attacking other examinees. That's an automatic disqualification, you dig? Izuku pulled out his notebook and began rapidly scribbling. Standard point accumulation system. It favors destructive quirks. But there's a flaw. A school that prides itself on creating true heroes wouldn't judge purely on destructive capability. There has to be a hidden metric. Rescue points? Style points? Excuse me. I have a question. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and meticulously combed blue hair suddenly stood up perfectly straight, his hand raised rigid as a board. A spotlight instantly snapped onto him. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. The boy projected, his voice booming with authority. If this is a misprint, then UA, the premier hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of such a careless error. We examinees are here in earnest, seeking the guidance of absolute professionals. The boy then turned, his intense gaze locking directly onto Izuku's red Haori. And you! In the back. The boy pointed accusingly at Izuku. You've been muttering this entire time. And what on earth are you wearing? A brightly colored coat and wooden sandals? This is a formal examination, not a festival. Your lack of discipline is distracting and disrespectful. If you aren't taking this seriously, leave at once, the auditorium murmured. Bakugo scoffed, leaning back in his chair. He's got a point, Deku. You look like an idiot. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't shrink away from the spotlight, or the hundreds of judgmental eyes on him. Instead, he slowly closed his notebook, capped his pen, and stood up. He turned to face the tall boy with glasses. His posture was completely relaxed, yet there was a sudden, undeniable weight to his presence. The goofy, eccentric teenager vanished, replaced by an aura of absolute, hardened experience. You raise an interesting point, my friend, Izuku said, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent auditorium without the need for a microphone. It was calm, measured, and dangerously articulate. You say my attire is a distraction. Let me ask you, if a villain attacks a crowded street wearing a neon pink suit while playing a tuba, will you freeze up because it's distracting and disrespectful? The boy with glasses blinked, clearly taken aback. What? No, of course not. I would apprehend the villain, would you? Izuku countered smoothly. Because right now, in the safety of a controlled environment, you allowed a brightly colored coat to completely break your focus. A true hero, a true warrior, must maintain absolute situational awareness regardless of the absurdity of their surroundings. If my coat offends your discipline, then your discipline is fragile. Adapt, my friend, because the battlefield does not care about your rules. The auditorium was dead silent. The boy with the glasses stared at Izuku, his mouth slightly open, completely dismantled by the profound, irrefutable logic delivered by a boy his own age. I see, the boy said softly, bowing his head in shame. I apologize. You are entirely correct. He sat down quickly. Up on the stage, President Mike was grinning behind his microphone. Up in the secret observation room, Eraserhead let out a low whistle, while Niza the principal took a slow sip of tea, his dark eyes gleaming with intense interest. All right, settle down. Mike laughed, cutting the tension. To answer exam number 7111's question, the fourth villain type is the zero-pointer. It's essentially a massive obstacle. It's not worth any points, so if you see it, run the other way. That's all from me. Plus ultra. Izuku sat down, ignoring the odd stares from the students around him. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline begin to hum through his chakra coils. The time for talking was over. Test Center B. The gates. A massive group of examinees stood nervously before the towering metal gates of Test Center B. Izuku stood near the front, casually stretching his hamstrings. He noticed Uraraka nearby, taking deep, steadying breaths. The boy with the glasses, Tenya Ida, as Izuku had overheard, was stretching his calves, completely avoiding looking in Izuku's direction. Focus, Izuku told himself. Conserve chakra. Use pure taijutsu for the one-pointers. Save ninjutsu for crowd control. Suddenly, the massive metal doors began to creak open. Most of the students waited, expecting a buzzer, a countdown, or an announcement. Izuku didn't wait. The moment the gap in the doors was wide enough for his body, he dropped his center of gravity, channeled a burst of chakra into his calves, and launched himself forward. The wooden geta clacked against the pavement like gunshots as he blurred past the opening doors and into the foe city. What are you waiting for? President Mick's voice suddenly boomed from the PA system. There are no countdowns in real battles. That green-haired kid has the right idea. Run, run, run! Panic erupted as the rest of the examinees finally sprinted through the gates. But Izuku was already 2 blocks ahead. He turned a corner and immediately encountered 3 one-pointer robots. They were sleek, bipedal machines with glowing red eyes, locking onto him instantly. Target acquired, the robots droned in unison. Izuku didn't break his stride. He reached into the deep pockets of his baggy black pants, pulling out a handful of custom-made shuriken he had milled in his junior high metal shop. He leaped into the air, twisting his body to generate maximum torque. With a flick of his wrists, he hurled the shuriken. They didn't just fly straight. Izuku had coated them in a razor-thin layer of chakra, altering their aerodynamics. The shuriken curved sharply, striking the neck joints of all 3 robots simultaneously with terrifying precision. Sparks flew. The robots staggered, their visual sensors glitching. Izuku landed perfectly, sliding under the sweeping arm of the closest one-pointer. Without looking, he delivered a devastating upward palm strike to the underside of the robot's jaw. He channeled a fraction of his physical energy, not enough to break the steel, but enough to rattle the delicate internal circuitry. The one-pointer's head snapped back with a sickening crunch, and it collapsed into a heap of sparking metal. 3 points, Izuku tallied internally. He didn't stop. He vaulted off the fallen robot, launching himself toward a 2-pointer that had just rounded the corner. It was wider, resembling an armored scorpion. It raised its tail, preparing to fire a net. Izuku quickly flashed 3 hand seals: snake, ram, boar, earth style, mud wave. Izuku declared quietly. He slammed his foot down on the pristine, fake asphalt of the testing street. Instantly, the concrete beneath the 2-pointer liquefied into a rolling wave of thick mud. The robot lost its footing, slipping and crashing onto its side, completely immobilized by the dense earth. Izuku leaped over the trapped robot, driving his heel into its optical sensor on the way past, shattering the glass and shutting it down. 5 points. He continued his rampage through the city. To the other examinees who occasionally caught glimpses of him, Izuku Midoriya was a phantom. He didn't use flashy explosions or massive displays of raw power. He used terrifying efficiency. A group of 3-pointers cornered him in an alleyway. Izuku didn't panic. He formed the cross-shaped hand seal. Poof. Poof. 2 identical copies of Izuku appeared in puffs of smoke. The shadow clones didn't speak. They instantly fanned out, pulling lengths of high-tensile ninja wire from their pockets. The real Izuku and his clones moved in a synchronized blur, weaving between the giant robots, looping the nearly invisible wire around their legs and torsos. With a unified tug, the three Izukus pulled the wire taut. The 3 pointers were yanked violently off balance, crashing into one another in a massive heap of groaning metal. The clones vanished in puffs of smoke, conserving his remaining chakra, while the real Izuku tossed the single, homemade explosive tag, a paper bomb crafted from heavily condensed fire chakra, onto the pile. Izuku calmly walked out of the alleyway as a massive explosion rocked the buildings behind him. 25 points. That should be 50 total. The observer room. High above the training centers, in a darkened room filled with dozens of monitors, the faculty of UA High Schools sat in silence, watching the exam unfold. Principal Nizu, a small creature that was a mix of a mouse, dog, and bear, sat in a high chair, sipping from a delicate teacup. His beady black eyes were glued to monitor 4, which was exclusively tracking Izuku Midoriya. Fascinating, Nizu murmured, his tone laced with genuine intrigue. Absolutely fascinating. It's illogical, Shota Aizawa, the Erasure Hero Eraserhead, grunted from the corner, wrapped entirely in a yellow sleeping bag. His quirks, they don't make sense. I've watched him use super speed, object conjuration, earth manipulation, localized explosions, and duplication. A quirk is a biological function. It has a central theme. This kid is pulling from entirely unrelated power systems. Perhaps he has an energy manipulation quirk? Midnight suggested, leaning forward to get a better look. He can convert internal energy into different elements or physical enhancements. Even if that were true, the sheer physical toll on a 15-year-old body should be immense, Aizawa countered, his dark eyes narrowing. But look at him. He's not panting. He's not straining. He's moving with the efficiency of a seasoned pro hero who has been on the job for 20 years. His footwork is flawless. He never wastes a single movement. In the back of the room, standing in his skeletal form, Toshinori Yagi watched the screen with a wide, proud smile. You told me you had your own power, young Midoriya, but I never imagined it would be this refined. You aren't just a boy fighting robots. You look like a master among children. He's currently at 54 villain points, Nizu noted, typing on a keyboard. He has comfortably passed the threshold for the hero course. But let us see how he, and the rest of our promising candidates, handle true despair. Nizu reached out and flipped a large, red switch on the console, released the 0 pointers. Izuku was standing on a rooftop, taking a moment to catch his breath. 54 points. It was enough. Jiraiya's voice in his head urged him to conserve his remaining chakra. He had about half of his tank left, and there was no sense in burning it out to show off. Suddenly, the ground beneath the foe's city violently shuddered. Izuku dropped into a crouch, stabilizing himself as the building groaned. A deafening, mechanical roar echoed from the center of Test Center B. Dust and debris exploded into the sky as the 0 pointer emerged from an underground silo. Izuku's eyes widened. Okay, President Mike said obstacle, not a walking skyscraper. The machine was easily 100 feet tall. It towered over the buildings, rolling forward on massive tank treads. With a casual swipe of its gargantuan arm, it sheared the top off a 5-story building, sending massive chunks of concrete raining down into the streets below. Panic instantly gripped the examinees. The confident students who had been racking up points moments ago turned and fled in sheer terror. Run the other way, President Mike had said. Izuku stood up, intending to do just that. A shinobi knew when a battle was pointless. Fighting that thing offered no reward and massive risk. He turned toward the exit gates. But as he did, his enhanced hearing picked up a sound over the roar of the machine and the screams of the students. I'll help. My leg! Izuku snapped his head back around. Down in the street below, right in the direct path of the encroaching 0 pointer, a girl was trapped. A massive slab of concrete had pinned her ankle to the ground. It was the girl from the entrance, Uraraka. She was desperately trying to use her quirk to lift the rubble, but she was exhausted, her face pale and strained. The 0 pointer rolled closer. Its massive treads were only seconds away from crushing her completely. In the observer room, the teachers leaned forward. Aizawa reached for his comms to order an emergency shutdown. He never got the chance. Izuku didn't hesitate. Jiraiya's deepest, most fundamental truth flared in his soul. A ninja who breaks the rules is scum. But a ninja who abandons his friends is worse than scum. Izuku leaped off the roof. He plummeted toward the street, biting his thumb midair. He drew blood, instantly smearing it across his palm. He didn't care about his chakra reserves anymore. He didn't care about passing out. He opened the floodgates of his coils, pushing 90% of his remaining spiritual and physical energy directly to his hands. He formed the sequence faster than the eye could see. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. Izuku hit the ground directly between Uraraka and the towering zero-pointer. He slammed both his bloody palms into the asphalt, summoning jutsu. The resulting explosion of white smoke was apocalyptic. It ballooned outward, swallowing the entire city block, obscuring the view of the monitors in the observer room, and halting the zero-pointer's advance. The sheer force of the chakra displacement blew the dust away in a massive shockwave. Uraraka coughed, shielding her eyes from the sudden hurricane. When the smoke finally cleared, a shadow blotted out the sun. Uraraka, the fleeing students, and the stunned faculty in the observation room stared in absolute, unadulterated disbelief. Standing between Izuku and the zero-pointer was a toad. But this wasn't Gamakichi. This toad was colossal, easily matching the height of the 4-story buildings around them. His skin was a brilliant, vibrant teal, marked with dark, tribal-like patterns. He wore an orange sash around his waist, and strapped to his massive back were 2 gargantuan katana swords. Gamahiro. Izuku gritted his teeth, dropping to one knee as the immediate chakra drain hit him like a physical blow. His head swam. The giant toad looked down, his massive yellow eyes locking onto the tiny green-haired boy. Gamahiro didn't speak, he rarely did, but he gave a single, gruff grunt of acknowledgement. The big one, Izuku pointed a shaking finger at the zero-pointer. Cut it down! The zero-pointer's mechanical eyes locked onto the new, massive biological threat. It raised its gargantuan arm, preparing to crush the toad. Gamahiro moved with a speed that completely defied his massive bulk. He reached over his shoulders, his giant webbed hands gripping the hilts of his twin katana. Shing! The sound of the colossal blades being drawn rang through the city like a thunderclap. In a single, fluid motion, Gamahiro leaped forward. He didn't aim for the heavily armored torso. He aimed for the treads. The twin katana flashed in the sunlight, slicing through the reinforced steel, the hydraulic joints, and the thick armor plating as easily as a hot knife through butter. The zero-pointer let out a horrific screech of tearing metal. Without its base of support, the towering machine lost its balance, pitching forward, its massive head plunging toward the street. Now! Izuku yelled. Izuku pushed off his back leg, channeling every last drop of his remaining chakra into his calves. He launched himself directly at Gamahiro. The giant toad understood instantly. Gamahiro caught Izuku on the flat of his colossal blade and swung it upward with massive force, launching the boy into the sky like a bullet. Izuku soared through the air, directly on a collision course with the falling head of the zero-pointer. He held out his right hand. I need power. Maximum rotation. He didn't have enough control to do it alone. In midair, Izuku formed a one-handed seal. Poof! A shadow clone appeared beside him, suspended in gravity. The clone slammed its hands over Izuku's extended right palm, furiously aiding in the shape transformation. Chakra swirled, violently compressing and spinning. It expanded rapidly, growing from the size of a baseball to the size of a boulder, glowing with blinding, screeching blue light. The sheer concussive force of the sphere was tearing the air around it apart. Odama Rasengan. Giant Rasengan. Izuku slammed the massive sphere of chaotic chakra directly into the optical core of the zero-pointer's falling head. The impact was catastrophic. The blue energy ground into the metal, ripping the armor plating to shreds before violently detonating. The internal core of the robot exploded, sending a shockwave that shattered the glass of every building in a 3-block radius. The head of the zero-pointer was completely obliterated, the remaining chassis crashing into the street behind Uraraka with an earth-shattering boom. Izuku hung in the air for a brief moment, the shadow clone dispelling instantly. His chakra was entirely depleted. His muscles screamed in agony. The world went blissfully dark, and Izuku began to fall. He didn't hit the ground. Gamahiro, with surprising gentleness, reached out and caught the falling boy in his massive, webbed hand. The giant toad carefully placed the unconscious Izuku gently onto the pavement next to Uraraka, who was staring in wide-eyed, paralyzed shock. Gamahiro looked at the destroyed robot, let out a satisfied grunt, and sheathed his massive swords. With a colossal poof, the teal giant vanished back to Mount Myaboku, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and marsh water. Silence descended upon Test Center B. Then, the loud, blaring sound of a buzzer echoed from the PA system. "Time's up." President Mick's voice practically cracked over the speakers. In the observer room, nobody spoke. The screens showed the aftermath: the obliterated zero-pointer, the ruined street, and the small boy in the red Haori lying unconscious on the ground. Aizawa slowly unzipped his sleeping bag, his jaw tight. "Nizu, what the hell is that kid?" Principal Nizu just smiled, a terrifyingly wide, sharp grin. "That Eraserhead is our newest student." Down in the street, Uraraka finally snapped out of her shock. She frantically crawled over to Izuku, ignoring the pain in her trapped leg. She grabbed his shoulder, shaking him gently. "Hey! Samurai boy! Are you okay?" she cried. Izuku groaned, his eyelids fluttering open. He looked up at the sky, then at Uraraka's panicked face. Despite the sheer exhaustion threatening to pull him back under, Izuku forced a weak, utterly roguish smirk onto his face. Did it work?" Izuku croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Did I impress you, Uraraka?" Uraraka burst into tears, caught between immense relief and sheer exasperation. "You idiot! You summoned a giant frog and blew up a skyscraper." "Yes, you impressed me. Just stay still." Izuku chuckled softly, closing his eyes again. "A frog?" he thought vaguely. "I'll have to correct her later. We're toads." With a content sigh, the gallant shinobi of Yue allowed himself to finally pass out. The entrance exam was over, and the legend had officially begun.